Ever since Sony and Microsoft officially announced that their next-generation consoles are in development, all kinds of rumors have been running rampant in regards to their potential graphical capabilities, launch dates, and of course, whether or not these successors will be dedicated home consoles or hybrids like the Nintendo Switch. And the question of whether or not hybrids are just a fad or something that should be the new standard really seems to divide the internet even more so than the Great Clam debate in '98. Because while many people love having the option to bring games with them just about anywhere, like to work, on airplanes, or to night school, there's still plenty of others who don't give a shit about any of that and would rather just sacrifice the portability to have their games look nicer. But if you ask my smelly yet sexy ass, I think if Sony and Microsoft don't make their next-generation consoles hybrids, then they're going to be leaving a lot of money on the table. And before half of you comment below to tell me what a silly man I am for saying that, let me just say that I think there's a way that both companies can copy the Nintendo Switch without sacrificing quality. So take a deep breath, crack open a can of artificial horse meat, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the 5-time Academy Award-winning Cameron, to tell you why Sony and Microsoft could be making a huge mistake if their next-generation consoles aren't hybrids. Despite being a relatively weak system, the Nintendo Switch is doing rather well for itself after a year and a half on the market. And while there's a few good reasons why, I think the main one's obviously because it's in the portable market, a market which Nintendo's never lost in. However, even though the Switch is more popular than myself at a small wiener contest, it still does have one big flaw, which is of course the fact that it'd be way cooler if it were just an ass hair more powerful. Because even though there's a ton of great games that don't need to be graphical powerhouses to be fun, there's a good handful of games that really do need the power, specifically from third parties. And even though Bethesda games like Doom ultimately offered the same experiences after coming to the Switch, it still can't be very easy to get these games running on hardware that'd be generous to call obsolete. And if you're the type of person who prefers playing games on your couch, then you might as well just buy the superior version on other consoles, which is oftentimes cheaper anyway. However, despite the Switch getting inferior versions of games, the portability is going to be more than enough to sway many people who don't mind the slight but noticeable graphical downgrade for multiplats that are possible to port over, even if some of these games are just remasters from the last generation. So despite the fact that there are an assload of people out there who don't care about portability at all, there's just as many, if not more, who at least want it as an option, which really leaves Sony and Microsoft in a bit of a standoff. Because either of these companies releasing a powerful next-generation hybrid console could certainly please consumers who wish they didn't have to sacrifice so much power to play games in the shower.
Excuse me, but I was just taking a shower.
However, this could also drive their fans away and rather just have the most powerful console possible. So if Sony released a hybrid model that was weaker than a next-gen Microsoft console and it didn't catch fire, then Microsoft would get all the definitive multiplats. Plus, if Nintendo releases a more powerful Switch after the PS5, then it'd complicate things for Sony even further in this scenario. However, if Sony were to release a hybrid and it was a hit, then it'd be disastrous for Microsoft to be the only ones without a hybrid on the market. Unless, of course, the Xbox 69 did something to stand out, whether it be by having more power or anything really. So how can everybody win? Well, despite the fact that I always say graphics are less important now than ever before, I do still think they matter, especially for Sony and Microsoft, since having powerful consoles is kind of their thing. And because of that, I definitely think their main focus in the next generation should be making powerful machines that won't be obsolete in 20 minutes. Which unfortunately seems to be the trend nowadays. But even though I think the PS5 and Xbox One 360's main focus should be on power and other features, I don't see why they can't also have premium hybrid models that don't sacrifice any features at all, including performance. I know many people would say that's not even possible to do, but if pricing wasn't taken into consideration, I don't think it'd be an issue, even if they were expensive as shit. Because as long as there's also reasonably priced home models, nobody could have any right to complain. I mean, nobody complained about PlayStation's VR costing $400 after all, and I know a hybrid PS5 would cost more than that, but remember, the PSVR was just a peripheral and not the entire setup, and the fact that it wasn't mandatory meant that nobody could complain regardless of how expensive it was. It was just something nice for people who could afford it. And if 3 million people were willing to spend that much money for something that nobody really asked for in the first place, then just imagine how many people would be willing to buy premium Xbox 9 or PS5 hybrids if it meant portability without sacrificing quality. And besides, if you take inflation into consideration, then you'd realize how cheap console gaming in the modern day really is. I mean, just look at catalogs in the early 90s. If games cost this much today, people would piss and shit all over the place. So as long as next-gen hybrids from Sony and Microsoft aren't forced like the Kinect was, then I'm sure it'd sell out the ass, or at the very least not lose either company any money if it didn't catch fire. Because even if they somehow didn't sell very many units and the optional hybrid models flopped, I'm sure Sony and Microsoft would eventually clear their inventory out. But I really don't see these hybrid models flopping even if they were expensive as shit, as long as there's must-have exclusives at launch. I know research and development costs time and money that have to be made back if these hybrids flopped, but even if the prices for these hybrids are too high for people at first, then you could always lower them in the future to make them more affordable as parts become cheaper. Even if Sony and or Microsoft's hybrids flop in the worst case scenario, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the next generation's a failure for either company, since they'd still have their standard models. Optional hybrid models failing would only just prove that people don't care that much about portability as an option. But if optional hybrid models were a success, then it could potentially lead to higher install bases as well, since households have always had multiple portables given the individuality. And I think Sony at the very least realizes this, since they've tried very hard to get into the portable market twice with the PSP and Vita. However, even though the Vita didn't do too hot outside of Japan, inside of Japan it did quite well for itself. And I could be wrong, but seeing as how Sony officially decided to kill it off, despite the fact that it was still popular in Japan even without any effort being put into it whatsoever, tells me there's a good chance they're planning on releasing some sort of hybrid. Cause let's face it, that'd be a lot more likely than Sony making a new dedicated handheld. I mean, they did officially discontinue the PS2 shortly before the PS4 was announced, and seeing as how Sony's no stranger to copying successful ideas from Nintendo, I don't see why they wouldn't toss their hat in the hybrid market as well. Especially if it was just as an option, and rightfully so since it's a good idea. Cause I don't see why portability has to be mandatory for a home console. In fact, I even think the Nintendo Switch should have a cheaper model that just sits its ass down in the living room and only plays games on TVs. Which I'm sure won't happen since Nintendo clearly wasn't thinking that far ahead by literally naming it the Switch. But the 2DS was still a thing, so anything's possible, I guess. And for those of you out there who don't think Sony or Microsoft should copy Nintendo because it's unoriginal, then allow me to kindly tell you to frig off. Cause copying ideas that just makes everything better should always be done. Sure, we all heckle Sony for how blatant they are about it, but even though we could have done without the Move, you can't tell me you don't want D-pads or analog sticks on your controllers. So why shouldn't the hybrid concept be copied as well? I mean, just look at how frustrating it is that Nintendo's not copying Microsoft's online service. The main and, in my opinion, only real issue to next generation Sony and Microsoft hybrids, though, would be that discs have to go in favor of cartridges. Cause there's really no way in hell that a portable Blu-ray player could be that compact, especially if it's also a fully powered next generation console. However, as long as Sony Soft didn't make cartridges unnecessarily expensive to manufacture, then this really shouldn't be an issue. I just hope for everybody's sake that the rumors of the next generation being completely digital aren't true, but that's an entirely different can of poop altogether. All I know is that whenever the next generation does come though, or if we're technically in it right now with the Switch being released at a weird time, I've got my fingers crossed that hybrids are the way of the future in console gaming, cause with consoles becoming more and more like PCs anyway, they really do need to do something different to stand out, cause even though gaming laptops are a thing, they can never be as convenient as hybrid consoles. Even if the Switch is barely big enough to fit in my astronomically large pocket in the back of my pants. What do you think, though? Should Sony and Microsoft just keep doing what they're doing? Should they give us hybrids as an option? Or should hybrids go away altogether? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and as always, I'll pin whatever I find most entertaining. Don't forget to like and share this video to help this channel grow. Thanks to everybody who supports this channel on Patreon for silly rewards. And if you're a sexy beast who likes being pandered to in end slates, then click the subscribe button if you haven't already. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty. Thank you for your support.